All right, Bib 1001, great to see you again or be seen by you. Hopefully you found Psalm 77 meaningful. That was one of my favorites. We are going to spend today working on Deuteronomy. I was hoping to be able to do this at home, but my technology experiment there didn't quite work out the way I hoped it to. So I am back out to campus, pretty much have the place to myself, and we're going to begin working our way through Deuteronomy and then kind of into the next set of books in the Old Testament. And so the way we'll get started is just kind of outlining Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy consists of 3 speeches from Moses. Moses is going to get them ready through Deuteronomy to enter into the Promised Land. Moses himself will not be entering the Promised Land. He is going to get to look at it, but he won't enter. And so he is trying to prepare Israel to enter into the Promised Land, and he gives 3 speeches to them. So speech number 1, it goes from chapter 1 through chapter 4, verse 43. So basically the first 4 chapters. And in this speech, Moses is recounting the history of Israel and the Lord. And so the first few verses are kind of an introductory in terms of setting the players, who Israel is, who the Lord is. And then the rest of it is recounting this history. And what Moses highlights as he recounts the history is how faithful the Lord has been and how stiff-necked, stubborn, rebellious Israel has been. And yet God has remained faithful. And so kind of brings them to where they're at. This is the history with the Lord and Israel. And now where do they go from here? Next speech is the longest by far, and it goes from the end of chapter 4, verse 44, all the way through chapter 26. And in this speech, Moses is laying out the covenant stipulations. So in chapter 5, he'll restate the 10 commandments. Then in chapter 6, we will get the Shema. We'll look more at that in a moment. And then the rest of the covenant stipulations. And so all of the various laws, all the regulations as to how they are to live, if they are to live loyal to the Lord and loyal to each other. In fact, in a word, I would summarize this whole thing as being about loyalty, about being loyal to God. So you're not going to serve any other gods but the Lord God who brought you up out of Egypt. And then you're going to be loyal to each other, that you're going to do each other right. And so if they follow these stipulations, they will have right relationships with the Lord, with each other. And then the third speech comes in chapters 27 through 30. This section is known as the blessings and curses, especially 27 and 28. And what Moses is announcing here is that if they keep the covenant stipulations, then they will experience God's blessings. They will experience rain. Their ground will be productive, fruitful. Their livestock will do well. They will have peace. It will be like a garden. And so keep the covenant stipulations and you live into God's blessings. But if you break the covenant stipulations, then you come under curse. And the curse will look like drought and famine. It will look like invasion and warfare, sickness. And the ultimate curse is to be expelled from the land. And so that's speech number 3, blessings and curses. And then there's also exhortations to make sure that you are obedient, that you keep covenant. The last 3 chapters, it's really about kind of Moses passing on leadership to Joshua. And then we get an account of the death of Moses. And so we have, I guess that'd be the last 4 chapters, 31, 32, 33, 34. So the last 4 chapters accounting the death of Moses as well as the transfer of leadership to Joshua. So we have these 3 speeches, and then we have kind of this post-log word about the death of Moses and about Joshua becoming the new leader. This is very much like a covenant. So a suzerain covenant treaty back in the day, back in ancient Israel, it would look very much like this, to where you had an emperor and a vassal king and kind of laying out their treaties or covenant with each other. And the first part of the covenant would be about the parties involved and their history, their relationship together. Then the second part of the covenant would be about the stipulations that are to be kept. and then the covenant blessings and curses, and finally the exhortation to keep it in kind of a post-log. And so that's what we see here. This form of literature would have been familiar to the people who are reading it as Moses and hearing it as Moses speaks it all out. And so they are very much making a covenant. And again, in a word, it's about loyalty. It's about loyalty to the Lord God, so that there'll be no other God that is served, that is worshiped, Israel living in total devotion to the Lord. And then loyalty to each other, that they're going to do each other right, they're going to treat each other according to the terms of the covenant, that they're going to be faithful to each other. And if they do this, then they experience God's blessings. And if they don't do this, then they are going to experience curse. And the ultimate curse is to be expelled from the land. Okay, you good on that? Hopefully you are. While I race the board here, talk about it with someone close by. Tell them about the speeches of Moses. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at with Deuteronomy is referred to as the Shema. And you read a little bit about this in your textbook, I'm sure. Shema is the word to hear, and it's the first word of the passage. And so we find this in Deuteronomy 6:4 through 9. And so I'll go ahead and write the first part of it up here on the board. So, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a moment. And then the next part of it is, love the Lord your God with everything you got, with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. So hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Now, we want to talk about one. What does it mean to say that the Lord is one? So key line here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. How are we to understand this oneness of God? So there's three basic approaches to it. So one approach is that this is an early form of monotheism. Now, monotheism is the belief that there's really only one God. Kind of get the switch there so you can see. So monotheism is the understanding, the belief that there's only one God. And so this would be an early form of it. Israel saying there really is only one God. That all the other gods are kind of pretenders. They don't really matter. Just this one God. So some would go that direction, an early form of monotheism. I'm not sure I completely buy that one. And the reason why I don't buy that one is because throughout Deuteronomy, there is admonitions not to worship other gods. And never does it say those other gods are non-existent. Never does it say those other gods aren't real, they're fake. The assumption is that there are other gods, but they're not worthy of worship. And so don't worship them. That they're ultimately not the creator, they're not sovereign over the universe, they're not sovereign over nature, so they're not worthy of worship. So, but nowhere in Deuteronomy is Moses trying to say, or does he come right out and say, those gods are make-believe, those gods aren't real, they're non-existent. No, it's simply that they're not worthy of worship. And so I kind of don't buy into the monotheism aspect. Now, a second way that this is understood, and some of your translations will go ahead and translate it this way, is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. So it'd be something like this: the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. So in this view, the Lord is the only one, the only God we worship. Okay, now this is very fitting, and I think this is correct, this is accurate, that it's a polytheistic world, But the Lord is the only God that Israel is going to worship because it's the Lord who brought them up out of Egypt. It's the Lord who saw them through the wilderness. It's the Lord who is going to give them this land. And so, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. We worship no other gods. And so, some of your translations even translate it that way. I think that's a good way to understand it, but I think there's also a third way to understand it. This third way is to think about God being one. And then we see the response. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Okay, and your mind. Toss that in there too. So you're to love God with everything you have. In other words, you're to be fully devoted to God. Why? Well, the Lord is one. The Lord is not divided. The Lord is not duplicitous. The Lord is not kind of two-faced. The Lord is holy for you. And so this would read this one as being fully devoted, fully committed to keeping this covenant, that the Lord is not going to enter into this covenant half-hearted, that the Lord is not kind of duplicitous, double-minded in entering into this covenant, that the Lord is altogether in on this covenant, brought Israel up out of Egypt, made that covenant promise with them, that if you keep my covenant, then you're going to be most treasured, you're going to be a holy nation, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. The Lord is all the way in on this. And even when they sinned, the Lord said, okay, I'm the compassionate and gracious God. I'm slow to anger, I'm abounding in steadfast love, keeping faithfulness to generation upon generation, still punishing the guilty, yes, but not allowing sin to break God's commitment to the covenant. And so God's commitment to the covenant, it's complete. And so, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The Lord is totally in, totally committed, not half-hearted commitment, but full commitment into this covenant. And so, therefore, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, with all your strength. So just as the Lord is one to you, so you should be one fully devoted back to God. And to me, that's the way that makes the most sense in terms of understanding the Shema, and especially in terms of this one. I get it that this is the only God there to worship, but I think this is actually news about God. Not simply news about us, this is the only God we worship, but I think it's news about God, that the Lord is one, fully devoted to us. Therefore, love the Lord your God with everything that you have. And then if we look further in the Shema, and I'm going to go ahead and turn to it here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Now, when he says they shall be on your heart, what they're getting at is that they are to be impressed upon our character. And so written on our heart is a way of saying that they are to be written into how we conduct ourselves, written into our very character, written into the way that we approach life, the way that we do life. Goes on. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. See, the goal is that these commandments, this covenant, all these stipulations, that they would become a way of life, that they would be internalized. And so you put them externally, all the places where you will see them, your doorposts, your gates, so that when you go out, when you come in, you see them. You put them every place. And then you talk about them constantly, and you talk about it with your kids. And so not only are you trying to impress it upon your own heart, but you're also trying to pass it on to the next generation, and so that it's impressed upon their hearts. And so you do this through having it visible, and you do this through constantly talking about it. And the goal is that it's not just hanging on the wall, but that it's actually internalized and becomes a way of life, becomes part of your character, the way that you conduct yourself, no matter where you're at, no matter who you're with, This is how you do life. Loving the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength, because God is totally devoted to you. So that's the Shema. I hope you can see a little bit of parallel with the Ten Commandments, because we remember how the Ten Commandments started. Not simply, thou shalt have no other gods before me, but I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, out of that land of slavery. Same thing. The Lord is one. Fully devoted, I brought you up out of Egypt, out of that land of slavery. Therefore, have no other gods before me. Therefore, no images. Therefore, don't take my name in vain. Therefore, keep Sabbath, etc. That's all about loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. And so the Shema. And make sure we pick up on that. Again, you can see the emphasis on loyalty. The Lord is one towards you, totally loyal to you. And so be totally loyal to the Lord. And so go ahead, let that sink in. Take a moment, talk about it with someone, explain to them the Shema, and especially think about that emphasis on moving it from being something that's external, hanging on your gatepost, versus internalizing it in your heart. And how do you get that internalized into your heart so that you begin to live that way, so that you begin to practice that way? I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about Deuteronomic theology.